Welcome to a tutorial video on Lua. In this video I'm going to cover functions and tables. Functions act in Lua like they do in many other programming languages. They are a set of instructions that do something. Sometimes something useful, but not always. They are always, though, sets of instructions. In fact, we were using functions in the previous video when we were using the print function to show the values of variables. In the previous video, we looked at 5, hello, and 5.5 as the values of the variables a, b, and c. In this video, we can define our own functions by using the function keyword and end. Function end follows the similar pattern that was introduced in the previous video of the if-then-end sequence. When we were using conditional statements, we were looking at if-then-end. The end was closing out the conditional statement and anything that should be run within that conditional statement. Functions follow that same pattern. We see here the use of the keyword function, the name of that function, open and close parentheses, and anything we want to send into that function that will act as parameters. We can send data into a function, and we can also get data out of a function. But they are defined using the function keyword, their name, open and close parentheses, anything we want to send into it, and then the end keyword. Notice it follows the same pattern introduced of the if-then-end. Function end has the same pattern. I mentioned we can send data into a function. We do that by defining what we want the name of that data to be within the parameters section of the open and close parentheses for that function. In this case, it is input. The first thing we send to this function will be called input within that function, and then we can use that variable name. We can also get data back out of a function by using the return keyword. For those that have seen other programming languages, this is very similar. We see we can send data in using a parameter and what we want to call it. We can also use the return keyword to return data back to whatever calls that function. Let's look at this in practice. Down here in line 5, we have result equals add to, the function we defined up here, lines 1 through 3, and then what we're sending into it, in this case the integer value 2. And this is input within this function. So we see within the function add to, the variable input plus 2 should be returned, and it will be the value of result. Let's run this. We see here the very first thing is 4. And that's add 2 as input within add 2 plus 2 is returned as a value and set to result. And now, similar to what we did in the previous video, we're calling a function in this case, just like we did for add 2, where we send data into it using open and close parentheses, and we see print the result, so get the value of the variable result, which is equal to 4 because we sent the value 2 into add 2, it added 2, returned that, and result was equal to 4. So we see in Lua, we can set and define our own functions using the function keyword and following the same pattern we saw of if-then-end using function end. Moving on to tables. Lua doesn't support arrays. In many programming languages, there is an idea of a complex data type called an array, usually a sequence of values. Lua does not support this directly. Instead, Lua supports a composite data type called a table. Tables in Lua are similar to arrays in other programming languages. They're also similar to associative arrays in other languages. Let me show you what I mean. In another programming language, we would define array as a sequence of values. In this case, in Lua, we use open and closing curly brackets around some sequence of data. So we see here on line 8, table demo is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These values within this sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they are enclosed using the open and closing curly brackets around them. So table data is equal to a table, and within the table are the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, we can treat this like we do other programming languages and access that data using its index, because this is a sequence of data. So we can access the first one in this list by using open and closing square brackets after the name of the table and the number of the index we want. In this case, we want the first one, which is equal to the value 1. And we actually see this over here, 1, right after this. So we're printing the value of the variable table and an index of 1. In Lua, unlike other programming languages, tables start at 1. They don't start at 0. So in this case, the very first thing within the sequence is 1. And so we got the very first value of 1. If we change this to 9 and rerun this, we see we can get 9 because 9 is the first one in the sequence. So we see here we can treat a table in Lua like an array in other programming languages. That is, it can be a sequence of data. It can also be something that's called an associative array in many other programming languages, or sometimes called an object literal in other programming languages. But what this means is we don't have to use a number index. We can use a key value system to get information out of a table. We see that down here on lines 11 through 14. I've defined another table, table map. Notice the open and closing curly brackets around these. But in this case, I've used open and closing square brackets, a string value, and it's equal to a number value. And we see here Dan and Jordan. Dan is equal to 33, Jordan is equal to 35. We can use those similar to we use the index value of the table that we saw in table demo, 1 to get 9. We can get Dan to get 33. And we see that right here. That was the next in line. So in the same way that we can use the index value of a sequence of data, we can create sort of a map of key value pairs of using a key of a string to get a value of a number or something else like that. And we saw that here on line 15. We're printing the value of the variable table map for the value that matches the key Dan. We see on line 12, Dan, the key, is equal to the value 33, and so we saw that over here using the same setup of open and closing square brackets that we saw down here. Now, we can also get the number of entries within a table using a function called getIn. In this case, right here, we use table.getIn, so get the number of, and the table that we want to get the number of. Table actually exists as a number of different things within Lua that allows us to do different combinations of things on tables. In this case, if we wanted to get the length, that is the number of things within the table, we can use that using table.getIn, and using table demo up here, we see it has 5 entries, 9, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this case, and table.getIn, we see returned 5. So let's review all this. Coming back up to the top, we see we can define functions within Lua using the function and end keywords. We can define a function using the function keyword, the name, open and close parentheses, and whatever we want to send into that, in this case input, we can define up here. Within that function, whatever we define as a parameter, we will be able to use as a variable within that function. As I reviewed, functions, just like the if, then, end covered in the previous video, are spaced in, at least one space, but usually tabbed. And if we want to get information back out of a function, we use the return keyword. We can send data in using a parameter, get data out using the return keyword. We saw down here that we can send data 2 into as input, 2 plus 2 was returned, and we saw the result of 4. Then, when I begin talking about tables, I describe them as both a sequence of data, when it's defined such a way, but also a key value pair or a map. We saw on line 8, table demo is equal to a sequence of data, 9, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which we can access using the open and close square brackets here. And we see getting the first one, because Lua tables start with 1, got us 9 when I change this, and that's 9 over here. We also saw how we can use tables similar to an associative array or an object literal or a map, depending on your background in programming language, to define key value pairs. So we saw the first key defined using open and close square brackets and the name of the key as a string. And we saw right here we can do the same thing as requesting it Dan was 33. We also changes Jordan and get 35. Defined in a similar way using open and close curly brackets. Instead of the square brackets, we're using as the keys and as the reference to get a key, using a key to get a value out of a table. Finally, I introduce the table object and table.getIn as part of a number of different functionality that Lua provides using the table object. In this case, getIn gets the number of entries within a table. Because table demo is a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it has 5 entries, and we saw that in our output. Current number of entries in the table, 5. Thanks for watching.